Greetings viewers and welcome to today's info share snippet where we will be covering the Sage 200 Evolution Diagnostic Tool. Now, as the name implies, this tool allows you to diagnose certain areas within your database. And very often is that you have situations where you're reconciling different areas within your company. For example, an AR or AP analysis to your control accounts. Things like a work in progress report to your work in progress account, inventory valuation to an inventory control account. And the diagnostic tool makes this process streamlined and really easy to perform. And today we'll be showing you exactly how to go about this process so that if you are reconciling different areas within your application or your database, you can use the diagnostic tool very effectively. Now, very importantly is that the diagnostic tool is a separate application and therefore needs to be installed separately within your Evolution database. So what normally happens is that on your installation screen, you'll see that there's a list of components there and you have the diagnostic tool as an option to install. So if you wish, simply tick that option and install the diagnostic tool combined with your Evolution installation. You also have the ability to install the diagnostic tool separately. So if you browse installation disk on Sage 200, there will be a separate folder called Diagnostic Tool, and you can then install that application separately once the initial installation has been completed. Right, so let's continue. Now, what happens is that when you install the diagnostic tool, you'll see that in your program directory, there's a folder called Diagnostic Tool. And if I run that, you've got a couple of DLL files there. And I'm just going to open up the Diagnostic Tool. And when logging for the first time, you need to run a configuration. And these include, firstly, is that the database server, which simply means is that the database where you're going to be performing this diagnostic process. So it's a case of specifying the SQL server information and the database where the analysis or diagnostic is going to take place. Right, then you need to specify also details about your common database, which is linked to your existing company. And then very importantly and usefully, we have an option for system information. So you can either determine if you're at the client machine or at the server station, and you can then obviously run certain details about the system information. You can run a ping test, obviously, if you're at the client, to ensure that there is communication between the client machine and the server. Details about the firewall settings, as well as the SQL configuration. So if I just say, for example, server, you'll see obviously the ping test is no longer available. Of course, I specified that's a server. However, if I use client, we can then run a ping test if required. And it's a case of login once the details have been completed. Now, firstly is that we've got the ability to, obviously when running certain settings within the diagnostic tool, certain scripts are being run to check the validity of information within certain tables. However, you are able to import, for example, custom scripts that you may have run, and then obviously import them into the tool, and then obviously just check the outcome based on the relevant information on the SQL script that you've customized. Now, very importantly, under data, we've got the diagnostic check, and the diagnostic check details certain modules. So, for example, accounts payable, AR, the common module, GL, the implementation checks, very important, and inventory and tax options. So, for example, if I go to accounts payable, you'll see that one of the common things that you normally would look at, for example, are where you have an age analysis that doesn't agree with the control account. Okay, so you can analyze that and say, are there transactions which appear in the control account but on the subledger, transactions in subledger but on the control account, and if there happen to be, for example, any out of balance postings. So obviously this control on a subledger would be if there have been direct postings to the control account, which obviously not affected the subledger, which could result in differences. With regards to allocations of payments and receipts by customers and suppliers, you can obviously check for no mirror transactions. Okay, allocated amounts differ, and if there have been over allocations, things like credits allocated to credits and debits allocated to debits. And you may just find that you perhaps have, for example, due to connection failure, that you may have, for example, null value postings within your AP module. That also gets checked for. And I can just simply say, for example, select the option I want to check, and I can select all or just a couple of them. If I then move on, for example, to AR, very similar. In this case, we're going to do comparisons between your AR module and your subledger and the various control accounts. So obviously we can check those details there, which is very similar to the AP settings. When we come to the common, this really allows you to go check for any duplicate records that may be encountered within your database. So for example, if it's a new company, they may have been importing of information via SQL or other methods, and there could be duplicate records, which could result in errors in the front end of the program. So simply a case of checking all these options and checking for any duplicate records within the various modules. Also a very useful option, I mean, if you've just started operating a company, perhaps you've imported the master file information, etc. Always good maybe just to run the diagnostic tool and just to check for any duplicate records that may be within the database after the import has been done. We can then move on to general ledger. So once again, we've got things like null value postings, out of balance, etc. Okay. Obviously, these could very well happen, for example, if there's been a loss in connection between a client machine and the server when a transaction is taking place. So you may only have, for example, one leg of the transaction being processed, which could result in out of balance situations. And you could also obviously then check that out when viewing a trial balance and running a GL relink, that you may encounter situations where you would need to go run a GL relink to go fix those out of balance situations. We then have the implementation checks. Okay, very useful if you create a new database with no records and you've set up your own transaction types, defaults, etc. for the various modules. Always ensuring that those default transaction types are correct, which obviously if they aren't, they're obviously going to impact your postings between the subledgers and the control accounts, etc. So just go and run these options and ensure that all those transaction types have been set up correctly with the relevant accounts. And once you've checked that, then you can begin processing within your new database. We then have inventory, which is very often, which is quite widely used. Things like negative inventory quantities. If you disallowed negative inventory, check for those informations. Checking for things like transaction quantities, for example, where you have for example, an available quantity or quantity on hand, and that quantity doesn't agree to, for example, the transactions. So go check those details out, and also once again null value postings, which could cause errors within the front end of the database. And then we've got the tax option. For example, transactions that appear on the control account but not within the tax report, and then on the tax report on the control account, and then different posting values which differ. So as you can see, there's a wide range of options that you can go look at, and then obviously go and run that, check that everything is in order. So I'm just going to go run, for example, the accounts payable one, say select all of those options, and let's just see what the outcome is. So there we go. It's running through now. Great, there's no errors, which means that everything's in balance, everything's in order. which is really the ideal situation, what you'd want to see in all of those modules, really. Then under the reports option, you can obviously go around details for previous checks. So, for example, if you may have gone to go run a couple of checks previously, to go check that information. And just to demonstrate the process here, I'm just going to close the diagnostic tool, go into my database, and we're going to go and purposely go post a transaction to the AP control account, which will bypass the supplier ledger or the supplier subledger, and just check what the results are going to be when running the diagnostic tool. So if I go to my general ledger accounts, and I'm going to go find the payables control account, if I edit that account, you'll see that there is an allowed journals option. So you perhaps would want to maybe disallow that option, uncheck that option, which will then disallow journals and then prevent the direct postings to the control account via a GL journal. It simply means is that when doing a GL journal, that the accounts that have been unchecked will not be available for selection when on the drop down on your accounts field. So what I'm going to be doing now is I've allowed journals on my control account for AP, and I'm going to go process a journal batch specifically to the control account. Right, so there's my defaults, etc. And just say, for example, pick up an expense account. And here I'm going to go specify my payables control account. Right, we've allowed journals, so there's no problem there. We've credited the control account for accounts payable with $8.99. And so I'm just going to go and check these details. Let's just go to our reports, account transactions, and we'll go to payables control for the period that we're in. Right, so payables control. Okay, there's the, just go find that transaction quickly. Okay, so it's got post, so got to post the batch there. Right, much better. Just go to our reports, account transactions, payables control, and let's just go into that period. Right, there we go. So there's our transaction, which has now gone to the control account. It has bypassed the subsidiary ledger. And we'll go check now. That's the amount, 10793.60. Right, let's just go to our AP age analysis. And let's just go check those details there. As at today's date, we'll make it the end of the month. So as you can see, there's a difference there. So For example, maybe in your reconciling phase at your month-end procedure, you're going to go and view the various agings and ensure that they agree to the control account. In this particular instance, you've picked up a discrepancy. Right, quite simple. I'm now going to go and use a diagnostic tool to go check at what could possibly be causing this difference. So we need to go to our diagnostic tool. Right, there's the details. I'm going to log in, and we've established that the problem is regarding accounts payable, and we're going to go and check for all of these details just as a precaution. Select all of them and run that. Right, it tells me that in this particular instance, there are some validation errors and which need to go be investigated. So I'm going to say okay there, and there we have it. So it just tells me exactly this is a script that's been run in order to go and check for transactions which are in the control account but not the subledger. And there's our transaction. So it tells me this is the transaction date, where it was processed, the relevant details there, the sub account and the main account information, the transaction code was processed, and there's those details. So, and also very importantly, the audit trail number. So I can simply go and check, right, these are the details. There obviously could be a whole range of them, and then I could investigate why they were direct postings to the control account, etc. And what you'll see here is that if you may have had different scenarios, that we would have a breakdown of exactly what the outcome was. So for example, we've got one transaction where it appears in the control account of the subledger, and then obviously if there were others, it would give you the number of transactions where there were discrepancies, etc. So I could then go and view this report and then export this to Excel if I need to, do some further analysis there, and check that everything is in order, and then go and investigate the transactions which happen to be causing these discrepancies within my control account, etc. So as you can see, a very useful tool to make use of if you are going to be when reconciling control accounts, etc. Also things like implementation checks to ensure that if it is a new database that you've created, that all the relevant parameters have been set up correctly. If you've been importing, that there are no duplicate records that have been imported. So very useful, a very useful module that allows you to go and reconcile different areas in the program efficiently and very streamlined. So just once again, a quick recap is that we're going to have a folder called the Diagnostic Tool within your install directory. Run that application, run the configurations for your database name and the common database, as well as you can obviously also run some system information checks. And once you're done there, simply go specify the module that you want to analyze and run the details there, check for any other information, and it's going to give you a breakdown of exactly where there are discrepancies, which you can then go and look at within the database, and if need be, export those results to Excel and do some further analysis from there. That's a wrap from me. Once again, thank you so much for watching. It's over and out. Goodbye.